You ever get one of those letters that pretend to be polite, but you can just feel the smug oozing off the paper? That's how this whole mess started. A glossy envelope with a gold embossed tree logo and a message that basically said, "Hey neighbor, we decided your entire way of life doesn't match our aesthetic, so we're going to need you to leave, except dressed up in corporate, speak in passive-aggressive niceties. I live out on what used to be the old North Creek Ranch, been in my family for over 100 years, 300 acres of rolling hills, a patch of forest, and a little creek that sings when the wind's just right. My grandfather built the house with his own hands. My dad was born in the upstairs bedroom, and I learned to ride before I could read. So, when the folks over at the newly minted Cedar Falls HOA decided that my land was, quote, no longer synergistic with the evolving residential character of the area, well, let's just say that didn't sit too well. At first, I thought it was a joke. The offer they made was a laugh. $210,000 for 300 acres of prime, soil, water rights, structures, and legacy. That wasn't an offer. That was a slap in the face. But what really got me wasn't the number. It was the tone. It was the assumption that they were doing me a favor by trying to erase a century of history to make room for their yoga studio and pickleball court. The person behind all this was a woman named Meredith Kinley, the HOA president. If you can picture a woman who treats a minor landscaping violation like a felony and has a personalized notepad for reporting community discrepancies, that's Meredith. I knew her type the moment she rolled up in her Snow White Range Rover wearing what I can only assume was $300 worth of designer loungewear and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She leaned across my gate with that rehearsed warmth that says, I already know you're going to be difficult. And she said, Mr. Wyatt, your ranch holds sentimental value. I'm sure, but our community thrives on order and cohesion, and frankly, a livestock operation doesn't align with the Cedar Falls vision. Then she hit me with their final offer. I didn't even blink. Ma'am, I said, I've got cattle smarter than that number. I could see the smile twitch. That little crack, that was the first clue I had that this woman wasn't used to being told no. And so it began. At first, it was little things. Complaints about unpleasant odors from the cows, who are, by the way, on the opposite side of the property from their homes. Reports of excessive noise that turned out to be wind chimes on my porch. The kicker, a citation for visual dissonance because wildflowers, real native ones, were growing along our shared fence line. Apparently, Indian paintbrush doesn't match the HOA approved mulch color palette. I started documenting everything, every complaint, every letter, every thinly veiled threat, called the forensic accountant. In me, I like my evidence tight and time-stamped. What Meredith didn't know is I wasn't just some stubborn old rancher clinging to a patch of land. I was a man with a filing system and a whole lot of free time. Then one afternoon, I caught a surveyor walking my fence line. Young guy, nervous as hell, said Meredith hired him to investigate a boundary dispute. I asked him if he knew he was standing on private land. He turned red, packed up, and left in a hurry. I made a note of it. Every move she made, I locked, because I had a feeling this wasn't just about the view. Meredith wanted my land. Bad. What she didn't realize, what no one in that HOA realized, is that my grandfather was a lot more than a cattleman. He was sharp as a tack when it came to land deals. And one night, as I was digging through some of his old files, I found something, a lease agreement, a thick leather-bound contract with a development company called Northwood Estates LLC, dated back to the 8S I started reading. My heart just about stopped. Turns out before the Cedar Falls development was ever a glimmer in some investors' eye, my grandfather leased a huge swath of our southern land, just shy of 80 acres, to that company for a 99-year term. The lease was clear as daylight. The Caldwell family retained ownership of the land, and the leaseholders, the eventual residents of Cedar Falls, were tenants. All those perfectly paved streets, those matching mailboxes, those identical beige houses, they sat on our land, and the lease, it had rules. Rules about respecting the lessor's property, rules against harassment, clauses about interference, nuisance, and even penalties for hostile engagement. Suddenly, Meredith's letters didn't just look petty. They looked legally actionable. I called an old friend of mine, Genevieve Talcott, a retired real estate attorney who now spends her days fixing zoning mistakes for fun. She read over the lease, let out a low whistle, and said, "Wyatt, she's standing on A, trap, and doesn't even know it." We spent the next 2 weeks building a case, not to sue, at least not yet, but to prepare. The reveal, you only get to play this card once. I wanted it to land. Meanwhile, Meredith escalated. She sent a certified letter with the HO's final offer, $32,000. In the spirit of community, she warned that noncompliance might result in legal proceedings or code enforcement reviews. Translation, will sue you or find another way to make you miserable. That's when I decided it was time. The HOA called a special meeting residents only at their community center, a building they proudly called the Lodge, though it looked more like a bank lobby, painted in affluent taupe. Genevieve and I showed up 10 minutes late, just in time to catch Meredith mid-rant about unreasonable landowners and how the HOA might need to exercise all available remedies. I stepped in, tipped my hat, and said, "Funny you mention remedies. Miss Kinley, I believe we've brought a few of our own." You could hear a pen drop. Genevieve handed out copies of the lease, highlighted, annotated, and legally verified. We explained calmly and clearly that Cedar Falls was situated on land still owned by the Caldwell Trust, that recent HOA actions, trespassing, threats, interference were in direct violation of the lease terms, that we had the right, if we chose, to terminate said lease pending legal review. The color drained from Meredith's face faster than a busted pipe in January. One resident, a teacher, I think, stood up and asked, "Wait, does that mean you could evict us?" Genevieve replied, "The trust has no intention of displacing anyone, but the HOA's leadership has placed your community in legal jeopardy. That needs to change." And boy, did it. Meredith resigned 3 days later. The HOA board issued a formal apology published in their newsletter and requested to sit down to renegotiate terms. I didn't ask for the moon. I just asked for respect. We updated the lease to include a formal annual ground rent redirected into a fund to preserve local agriculture and ranching education. Cedar Falls got to keep their pickleball court. I got peace of mind and a reminder that sometimes the best defense is a quiet history filed away in a dusty drawer until the moment it isn't. Now I sit on the HOA board, not as a voting member, just as an advisor. They even replace the fence line wildflowers I lost with a new plot bigger than the last. Funny, right? How fast the tone shifts when the